The air stinks of sweat, pine smoke, and wet iron. You wake on a fur-covered bench beneath the shadow of carved beams, your head still ringing from last night's mead. But sleep doesn't mean safety here. Not for you. Not for any woman who dares to sit in the high seat when the warships are away. You're not a maiden. You're not a wife. You're a queen. And in the Viking world, that means nothing unless you can command warriors, spill blood, and carve your name into men's fare. The longhouse is silent except for the crackle of the dying fire and the faint clinking of weapons being cleaned outside. It's dawn, and already your household is preparing for war. Not your husband's war, yours. They never expected you to survive childbirth. They never expected you to outlive your brothers, and when your father's skull cracked open on the battlefield, they looked past you and offered the throne to your cousin. A man. A fool. You slit his throat before the meeting ended. That was your coronation. No crown, just a trail of bodies. The sagas don't always name you. They weren't written by people who wanted you remembered. But you were real. Women like you ruled Denmark, Sweden, the Isles, not by permission, but by terror. Gunhild, they called one. Wife to Eric Bloodaxe, mother of kings. She bathed in magic and malice. They said she could summon storms with a scream. But power like hers didn't come from gods. It came from fear. She ordered rivals killed, seduced enemies, burned entire villages when tribute fell short. And when they called her a witch, she smiled. It was better than being called weak. Another queen, Lagertha, if the legends can be believed, rode into battle with a breastplate under her linen and a knife under her tongue. Her first act as ruler was to stab her husband in the heart after he tried to discard her. No one questioned her after that. The Norse world didn't have queens in the sense of sitting pretty beside kings. You ruled if you could hold the seat, hold the land, hold the men. You ruled if others feared the consequences of touching what was yours. And you learned quickly, kindness gets you buried. The moment you hesitate, they pounce. Warriors don't follow softness, they follow steel. So you sharpened yours daily. You trained beside your housecarls. You slept with a blade under your cloak. You fed your enemies to the wolves when needed, or you forced them to feast beside you, smiling as they choked on poisoned broth. They taught you that the gods reward strength, that the afterlife is earned in fire and blade. But no one warned you what it would cost to live that way. No one told you that leadership means loneliness, that command means suspicion, that every ally is temporary. Even your children eye the throne when they think you're not watching. You can't rest, you can't soften. Because every day brings new challenges, ambitious men, rival clans, hungry sons. You listen at night for whispers through the walls. You sleep lightly. You trust no one fully. That's what it means to be a Viking queen. Outside, the village begins to stir. War drums beat low, echoing through the fjord. Ships are being stocked. Warriors sharpen blades and say farewells they hope won't be final. A chieftain approaches, hoping to speak with you before the gathering. He wants land. He wants favour. He wants you dead, but doesn't have the spine to say it. You smile and invite him in. You pour his mead yourself. You lace it with a pinch of something bitter and wait to see if he notices. This is your kingdom. Not of peace and order, but of loyalty bought in blood. You rule not through lineage, but fear. They won't sing songs about your kindness, but they will remember your name, and that's all that matters. The throne is bone, not gold. Each rib, a rival. Each vertebra, a betrayal. Each joint, an oath broken and avenged. You sit on it not because they loved you, but because they couldn't stop you. This is where we begin. You weren't born into power. You seized it. They tell stories of Viking queens as if their blood made them rulers, but you know the truth. Blood made you a target long before it made you a queen. Your mother bled to death giving birth to your youngest brother. Your father blamed her for being weak. You were 6. You didn't cry. You learned. By the time you were 10, you could split firewood, gut a cod, and ride bareback across frozen ground. Your father didn't teach you that. You watched the men train and mimic their moves with sticks until your hands blistered. You stole knives from the kitchen, practiced when no one was looking. You were a girl, and that meant you were invisible, until the first time you drew blood. They remember that day, the cousin who laughed when you tried to take meat from the spit. He pushed you, called you names, said your job was to sit still and serve. You put the blade through his thigh and didn't flinch when he screamed. That night your father didn't punish you. He gave you your own knife. Still, when he died, they didn't consider you. They gathered in the longhouse, the jarls and warriors, discussing who would rule next. You sat in the shadows and listened, heard your name mentioned once, only as a wife to be offered in marriage. They didn't see you as a threat. That was their first mistake. You called a feast the next night, said it was to honour your father. You poured their drinks, smiled, served roasted boar with your own hands. You watched them eat, watched them drink, and when they were too slow and warm with mead, you stood. You named your claim, spoke of bloodlines, quoted the old laws. Then, before anyone could laugh, you drew the knife and opened the throat of the man nearest the high seat. They didn't laugh after that. The rest didn't rise. They weighed their odds and stayed seated. You didn't need them to cheer. You just needed them to fear you. And they did. That was your coronation. No crown. No priest. Just spilled blood on packed earth and silence where doubt used to be. The next weeks were chaos. The man you killed had brothers, sons, allies. They sent threats, then raiders. You met them at the shore, not behind your warriors, in front, blade drawn, cloak soaked through from the sea spray. You shouted orders above the screams. You fought like you had nothing left to lose because you didn't. That battle earned you their respect, not their loyalty. That took more. You started with gifts, land, gold, favours. You bought time, then you used it. You hunted down your enemies one by one, not on the battlefield, in their halls, in their beds, poison in a goblet, a blade in the dark, a fire lit at midnight. You never left survivors. People began calling you blood-fated, a woman blessed by the gods to bring death. They didn't say it with hatred, they said it with awe. But you didn't believe in fate, only in power. Others followed your path. Queen Skuld, half-sister of a king, wife to a warlord. When her husband fell in battle, she gathered his army and marched on her brother's stronghold. She rode with a cloak of raven feathers and a promise, submit or be buried. He chose wrong. They say she ordered his execution and smiled as his skull cracked open under the sword. There was Sigrid the Haughty, who rejected one king's marriage offer and burned the next suitor alive when he came with gifts but no respect. Her hall became a graveyard of men who thought her beauty made her weak. You were no different. Your bloodline gave you a claim, but it was fire and blade that gave you the throne. And behind you, always, the whispers that you were too cruel, that no woman should wield that kind of power, that the gods would punish your pride. Let them whisper, let them fear, because you learned early what your mother never knew. Kindness is a story men tell to tame queens. You ruled through blood because blood was the only language they understood. And now, when young girls sneak into the training fields at dusk, they don't carry sticks, they carry steel. They say your name in secret, not as a warning, as a prayer. It begins like all wars do, not with a scream but with silence. 2 queens, 2 bloodlines, 1 claim. You never planned to fight her. You knew her as a girl, shared fires, lessons, even dreams once. But dreams end when power enters the room. You took the eastern coast, she took the west, and the sea between you boiled. They called you wolf daughters, not sisters, not friends. Wolves don't weep when they fight. They tear. She sent messengers first, polished words on painted scrolls. You answered with bone, 2 heads, stripped and salted, returned in a wagon drawn by black horses. She read that answer well. A fleet came within a fortnight. Longships lined the horizon like teeth, shields painted in her colours, dark red and white. Her banner showed a woman with a spear through a king's crown. You understood the message. She was coming for everything. The men in your hall told you to wait, to parley, to hide. You sent them to dig trenches. Then you gathered your housecarls and set your own sails. You met her halfway, on a spit of black sand soaked with tide and fate. Wind tore at your cloaks, salt dried in your mouths. Your warriors formed their walls, spears up, shields locked, then silence. Until the first horn blew, you saw her then, taller than you remembered, hair braided with iron, a scar down her jaw that hadn't been there before. She wore no crown, just a blade you'd seen once in your father's hands. She saw you too, nodded, a flick of recognition. Nothing more, no words, only war. The first charge broke like a wave. Arrows screamed from both sides. You moved through the crush of bodies with your axe low and your vision tight. You weren't fighting for survival. You were fighting to erase her from the map. Blood soaked the shore so thick it looked black. Horses screamed. Men drowned in inches of water. Steel found mouths and ribs and throats. Your cloak caught fire from a torch and you tore it off without pausing. You saw her only once mid-battle. Across the chaos, she locked eyes with you. No hate, no fear, only certainty. Then she vanished into the smoke. The battle ended at dusk. You held the field, but not the war. She returned 2 moons later, not by sea this time, but by land, through your forests, your hills, your own people. Villages you thought loyal opened their gates to her. She didn't slaughter them, she fed them. She promised them protection. She told them stories. That was her weapon. Words. While you sharpened blades, she sharpened memory. Whispered tales of how you killed your kin, of poisoned cups, of soldiers buried alive for failing you. She didn't have to prove them. She just had to speak them. You came back from a campaign to find your own people eyeing you sideways, your allies thinning, your messengers intercepted. This was her second war, and it was working. You changed tactics, hunted her riders, cut off supply lines, took prisoners, sent them back with fingers missing and threats carved into their backs. She didn't respond, not directly. But one night your brother's head appeared at your doorstep, eyes sewn shut. He had been loyal. He had been careful, but not careful enough. So you returned the favour. A month later, her daughter's body washed ashore, head shaved, chest split, mouth stuffed with stones. That ended diplomacy. The last battle didn't happen in a valley or on a beach. It happened in fire. She laid siege to your hall with flaming pitch and ladders. You stood on the roof, your hair singed, shouting curses until your voice broke. She breached the doors, but not with an army, with a single axe woman, a former thrall turned warrior who carved a path through your guards like she was born for it. They found you bleeding in the throne room, still alive, dragging yourself toward your blade. You wouldn't let them take you. But she didn't kill you. Not yet. She stood over you, silent, then took your sword and left you breathing. Not as mercy, as punishment. You lived 3 more years, enough to hear the stories they told of her. Some called her a saviour, some a tyrant. But none forgot the war you waged together, and neither did you, because the only thing worse than dying in battle is losing in one. They said the gods demanded it, but you knew better. It wasn't the gods who wanted blood, it was the people. You've seen what happens after war, not the cheering, the silence, the waiting, the eyes that don't blink, the hunger for meaning after so much death. They need ritual, they need sacrifice, and someone always has to pay. Your queen's hall smells of mead and pine pitch, but beneath it lingers the scent of old blood. You hold court, but not with counsel, only with judgment. A dozen prisoners kneel before you, bound and silent, sons of rebels, daughters of defectors, captured in the last raid. Your warriors want to celebrate, but they also want justice. The chieftain's head you took last month bought you peace for a week. Now they want something more, not war, ceremony. You choose 5, not for their crimes, for their names, for what they represent. One is a cousin of your old rival. One is a merchant's son who fled when the village gates were breached. One tried to poison your food. The other simply bore the wrong family crest. You don't flinch. You say the old words. You command the pyre be built. The crowd gathers before sunrise. Smoke coils from wet pine. The drums begin low. You wear your cloak of wolf fur and iron rings, a spear in one hand, the runestone in the other. You don't smile. Smiling is for cowards. You are a queen. They bring the prisoners forward. Their feet drag. One weeps. Another stares at you with eyes like knives. None begin. They don't have to. The gods aren't listening. The people are. You touch each with the flat of your blade, then step aside. The fire starts small, crackling under fat-soaked wood and kindling soaked in ale. Then it grows. They don't scream, not because it doesn't hurt, because they know it's too late. The smell carries far. Villagers watch from the hills. Some nod, some vomit, some say nothing, but they all remember. The next day your tribute arrives without delay. Barrels of grain, iron, meat, furs, a carved oath stone from the North clans, etched with a promise, loyalty or fire. Blood doesn't just cleanse, it reminds. Once, when you were still claiming the coast, a priest told you that Odin drank only the blood of kings, that sacrificing common men was wasteful. You tested that theory. You caught the priest in a lie. He had sworn allegiance to your enemy. You hung him from the rafters and let the crows tear him open. The next season the rain came early. Now, whenever the sky darkens or the ground cracks, your people look to you, not for prayers, for action. And you answer, not because you enjoy it, because it works. There was a woman once, older than you, sharper than you, who ruled a set of fjords in the western edge of the world. She executed her own son when he betrayed a treaty she swore, not in private, in front of the assembly. Then she married her enemy to keep the peace. And when he died choking on stew, no one asked if she had stirred the pot, because the gods take their due. But queens collect theirs in advance. Even your inner circle isn't safe. One winter, when the fish vanished and the snow wouldn't stop, you bled a dozen of your own warriors, cut their palms, poured their blood on the stone altar, whispered names into the smoke. By spring, the fjord was thick with silver. They called it a miracle. You knew it was math. Power for power, life for life. You sleep light now, even lighter than before, because blood works, but it stains. And when you close your eyes, you don't see victory. You see flames. You see faces. You see their mouths open, not in screams, but in silence. And still, you do it again. Because peace doesn't last, but fear does. He thought he had tamed you. That's always how it starts, with a man thinking he's in control. You let him believe it. Let him speak first at gatherings. Let him ride ahead on hunts. Let him place his hand on your back like it meant something. Let him touch your hair, your sword, your pride. Because when men feel safe, they stop watching their backs, and that's when you strike. You married him after your third conquest. Not for love, for land. His clan controlled the mountain pass, choked with snow half the year, but priceless once spring came. Trade poured through that route like blood from a fresh kill. You needed it, so you offered him what he wanted, your hand. He took it like a fool. He was older, greying, strong enough to fight but weak enough to flatter. He saw your victories as flukes, your ruthlessness as charm. He called you his fierce dove. You let him. At the wedding feast you wore red, not because it was traditional, but because it made your enemies nervous. Every Viking queen worth her crown knows the colour of blood belongs at a marriage. He gave you a gift that night, a sword, silver inlaid, with your name etched in runes. You gave him your silence. He thought that was romantic. He didn't realise it was strategy. Love, real or false, was the most dangerous weapon in your arsenal. After the wedding he grew bolder, tried to suggest alliances, interfered in your troop arrangements, whispered about moving the capital closer to his home fjord. That's when you began preparing. You started with the servants, the ones he trusted, bribed some, banished others. You replaced his steward with one of your own cousins, dressed in peasant garb and trained to stay invisible. You rewrote the household ledgers by hand night after night, until no coin moved that you didn't approve. You slept beside him like a shadow with teeth, and all the while your forces grew. He didn't notice the new blacksmiths in the courtyard, or the foreign messengers, or the quiet exchanges of silver for saltpetre. He was too busy preening for the clans, parading his young wife like a trophy. By spring you were ready. It began with the feast. Another feast, always a feast. Vikings would die for glory, but they'd kill for goat stew and ale. You toasted him with honeyed wine, kissed him softly on the temple, then turned to the crowd and told them a story. Not about love, about betrayal. You listed every debt he'd hidden, every village he'd extorted, every soldier he'd denied wages while feasting on their spoils. You produced witnesses, documents. One of his own concubines, trembling, held the knife he'd once used to threaten her into silence. He stood up. You didn't let him speak. You signalled your guard. 6 women in wolfskin cloaks surrounded him. One was his niece. She spat on the floor before pulling her blade. They didn't kill him. You didn't want a martyr. You wanted a lesson. So you stripped him of his titles, burned his sigils, marched him barefoot through the village he once ruled, and sent him to the farthest northern outpost, exile in a land where the snow speaks louder than kings. The clan said you were heartless. You smiled. Heartless women make strong queens. After that, love became a weapon you used again and again. A promise here, a touch there. Men offered you loyalty, thinking it meant protection. What it meant was leverage. One general served twice as fiercely after you kissed his brow and told him you dreamed of growing old beside him. He died with your name on his lips, his chest split open on a Saxon blade. You wept for him. Not because you loved him, because his death came before you needed it to. Another you let live. He saw through you, called your bluff during a council meeting. You respected that. So you married his daughter, elevated his family, and made him part of your war council. Even love, when not deadly, can still be useful. Some say you lacked feeling. That's a lie. You felt everything. But you learned to separate emotion from execution. Love to a queen isn't about softness. It's about precision, timing, opportunity. You don't survive in a world of iron and smoke by following your heart. You survive by knowing how to weaponize it, and when the time comes, by knowing when to bury it. The gates didn't fall in one night. They cracked, they splintered, they bled. Like you. You were past 50 when the siege began. That's what they whispered. Too old, too slow, too soft. Your joints ached in the cold. Your grip lost its edge. But you still stood taller than most of the men who questioned your rule, and you still wore your blade every day. They came at dusk. A dozen war bands united under one crest. Not Saxons, not Franks, not foreigners. Your own. Men you had fed, clothed, armed, led into battle shoulder to shoulder. They turned, not for hate, for power. You trained them too well. You taught them to take what they wanted, and they learned. The siege lasted 2 weeks. You barred the gates, ordered the wells guarded, the grain rationed. You walked the walls each night while others slept. The firelight made your face look hollow, but your voice stayed firm. They needed to see you, to believe you were still the queen, not just the name behind the banners, but inside you felt it slipping. The people grew quiet. They obeyed, but not with pride, with fear, a different kind of loyalty, the kind that crumbles. Your war council fractured. Some urged negotiation, others vanished. One betrayed you, opened a side gate during a snowstorm. You caught him yourself, didn't wait for the trial. You slit his throat at dawn in front of the blacksmith's children. That sent a message. But messages don't stop hunger. You had food for a month, maybe more. But no one wanted to wait that long. No one believed they could. So you prepared for the last stand. You melted the silver, forged coins into arrowheads, filled clay pots with oil and cloth, took your dead from the ramparts and burned them in a ring around the hill. Smoke thick and choking, a wall of fire and ash to keep the cowards out. Then, the final breach. It wasn't clever. It wasn't brave. Just endless pressure. Ramming logs, iron axes, flaming tar. You heard the gate collapse before you saw it. A sound like a rib snapping inside the earth. You didn't run. You dressed in full armour, iron plates over leather, braids woven tight. You painted your cheeks with soot and blood. Not for drama, for memory. You wanted them to remember what a queen looks like when she chooses how to fall. You met them at the steps of your longhouse, not with a speech, with steel. They expected you to die quickly. You didn't. Your axe took 6 before it broke. You killed the 7th with a carving knife. The 8th you bit, but numbers mean nothing when they never stop coming. They didn't give you an honourable end. They dragged you to the hall, held you down, demanded names, secrets, gold. You spat blood at them. You refused, so they made an example of you. Cut your name from the stones, burned your crest, hung your body upside down from the rafters where you once ruled. They called it justice, but justice doesn't smell like smoke and silence. It smells like fear. They feared you, even in death. Feared what you built, what you knew, what you passed down to every daughter who ever watched you speak without asking permission. The siege ended with your blood on the floor, but you were never conquered. They won a building, not a throne. You were never just a ruler. You were a warning, and warnings don't die.